Toyota Tacoma owners drive a manual transmission, or at least know how to drive a manual transmission. Well, good morning, everybody. How are you today? Pretty good here, and I'm out cruising around in my manual transmission Toyota Tacoma, and I got to thinking, real Toyota Tacoma owners drive a manual transmission, or at least know how to drive a manual transmission. I get a lot of comments on the channel, when I mention something about the truck being more rough or the transmission being sticky and clunky. And people say that, well, it's a truck. It's supposed to be that way. I've often complained that the manual transmission in the Toyota Tacoma is somewhat subpar. That it could be better, and that Toyota has really kind of left us manual enthusiasts behind when it comes to the Toyota Tacoma in its rawest manual transmission form, right? But I got to thinking even further. I bet you that a lot of the comments that I get from people that tell me that it should be rough and clunky and rattly and all that because it's a truck probably don't have manual transmissions. And I'll bet you half of those people probably don't even know how to drive a manual transmission. So I got to thinking, the purest connection that you can get with your Tacoma or any vehicle really is to drive a manual transmission. Now, I guess I'm not saying that you have to own a manual transmission Tacoma, but you at least need to know how to drive one, right? Because if you claim to be a true truck guy or gal, then you certainly would know how to drive a manual transmission, because it would just be kind of inborn in you, right? It would be an innate desire to want to know how to drive a manual. And further, you would find a way to learn how to drive a manual transmission, because you want that purest connection that you can get with the truck. And the manual transmission gives you that. Again, even being as ratty as it is, it does give you the purest, most direct connection that you can get with your truck. People with the automatics, they complain all the time. It's always gear searching. It has a lag. It doesn't accelerate well. You don't have any of those problems with the manual transmission. First of all, you're selecting the gears, right? So if it's always searching for gears, you must be playing with that stick. I'm just saying. And if acceleration is an issue, it must be the difference between your foot, the clutch, the accelerator, and the shifter. Now, it's not to say that the manuals are any faster. They're not. It's been proven over and over again that now, because of technology, a man or woman cannot shift as quickly as the computer can. So it's not really that it's any faster. It's not faster. It's that you control the available power that it has, right? So whatever that engine is bringing you, you've got it. It will go as quickly as it's capable of going, based upon how quickly you are able to run through the gears and operate the clutch. Now, there are things that you can do to improve that, of course. You can put a short shifter in. There's some kind of a accumulator or something like that you can delete. There's all kinds of things that you can do. But still, it comes down to you in the end, right? And that raw connection that you have with the truck. So I think that, to consider yourself a real, whatever that means, truck owner, then you should at least know how to drive a manual transmission. I'd even go as far to say that at some point in your life, you should either own or have owned a manual transmission Tacoma. Because how can you consider yourself to be a true truck enthusiast if you've never taken that leap, if you've never actually bought a manual transmission? Now, I know it's getting more difficult, right? It's getting more difficult to learn because the pool of teachers out there is shrinking. It's funny, I have heard of a few people, and I often wonder what they really think after they've done this, but I've heard of a few people who have actually gone out, bought a manual transmission, and had never driven one before. And when I say never driven, they might have sat in the seat a couple times or whatever, but they certainly haven't mastered it. And they've gone out and they've bought brand new manual transmission Tacomas off the lot, right? They actually had to have the salesman teach them how to drive a manual, assuming you can find a salesman that knows how to drive a manual, right? But they actually had to have the salesman kind of run them through the paces, if you will, to show them how to drive the manual. Then they signed the paperwork and they took it home. But what I'm curious is how many of those people regretted their decision, you know? And how many of them actually stuck through it or stuck with it long enough to really master the manual transmission? You know, I consider myself, right or wrongly, I guess, to have mastered the manual transmission. I learned how to drive on a manual transmission. I took my driver's test in a manual transmission. That was a bit scary because I wouldn't say at that point I had mastered it. But I started that way. And I've been driving a manual transmission off and on ever since I was 16 years old. And believe me, that's many, many moons ago. Now, the reason I've switched off and on, I guess, is dependent on where I lived. You know, for a long time, I lived in an area where I went to work every day, came home every day. Well, at least you hope you come home every day. And I had rush hour traffic to deal with. So, as I mentioned, you know, driving a manual transmission in rush hour traffic is not a whole lot of fun. You know, the constant shifting, the stop start, all that you get. I don't mean the stop start system. I mean the stop start movement that you get in rush hour traffic is a drag in a manual transmission, admittedly. So I guess I could excuse those that own an automatic if you drive or daily drive in those circumstances. But you still need to know how to drive it at least. You need to have mastered it at some point in your life. Because I think it's a shame that there's any consumer vehicle out there that's produced, while they still are producing them, that you wouldn't necessarily be able to drive because you've never driven a manual transmission. You know, the security it adds, I'm going to throw this in real quick because I think it's a real thing. You know, the security that a manual transmission adds is ironic. It's quite funny. You know, you've heard the stories probably, and who knows if they're urban legend or really true, but somebody sitting at a stoplight and a carjacker comes up, they're going to jack the car, right, or the truck. And they go to get in it, and it's a manual transmission, and they don't know how to drive a manual transmission. You know, there's a commercial that was out several months ago about a guy in his new car with a buddy. They're going somewhere, and they get out. The guy doesn't lock his car, and the other guy says, "Well, aren't you going to lock it?" And he says, "Well, why? It's a manual." And there's a lot of truth to that, right? I mean, there are most probably people out there now who don't know how to drive a manual. So the security you get from owning a manual is just another added benefit. Anyway, I just wanted to get on here. I was just thinking about that a little bit. I thought, you know, really to consider yourself a true Toyota Tacoma or vehicle enthusiast altogether, you need to know how to drive a manual transmission. And until you do, you're really not a true enthusiast. You're just somebody who drives the truck. Anyway, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you really have to be a manual transmission driver, or at least know how to drive a manual transmission, to be a true Toyota Tacoma enthusiast? I'd be curious to hear what you have to say. Also, real quick, if you're interested, check out my other channel. It is RobMotive JT, all about my automatic Jeep Gladiator. Don't forget to click that notification bell so that you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. And do me a favor, smash that subscribe button on the way out. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. Bye.